So if you haven't heard, House of the Dragon has wrapped up its season 2, and depending on who you ask, it was the worst thing to happen since 9/11, especially for some people overseas. But in reality, when you ask anybody who isn't terminally online, you get the usual responses. The pacing wasn't good, they needed more episodes, and unless you were paid by HBO, those would be fair criticisms. But the question now is, what exactly happened? How and why did we go from 10 episodes to 8, and how badly did that impact season 2? I'll also throw in another question in here for you. What's been going on with the online discourse regarding this season? Because, again, people have been making it seem like this season was as bad as Game of Thrones Season 8, going as far as to say they want Dave and Dan to return. If that last sentence made no sense to you, then congratulations, you passed the first test. The second would be to hit that like and subscribe button and leave a comment to appease the algorithm gods. But for now, let's get into it. So first things first, I'll be answering what exactly happened to Season 2, but if you want to check out the online discourse segment first, then I left some timestamps in the description below. But I'll answer this off the bat. What exactly happened? In short, it was HBO, now known as Max, coming in and messing with it. For those of you who don't know, Game of Thrones was originally supposed to be 7 seasons instead of 8. Dave and Dan had an outline for this long before they reached the halfway point, and HBO wanted them to extend this a bit more, and they eventually settled on 1 extra season. It's why so many of the characters are kinda lounging around during season 6, waiting for things to happen. Had HBO not tried to mess with the original outline for the show, then we might have gotten a very different finale. That said, HBO was always the home of much-watched TV, and at the forefront of water-cooler conversation. From Sopranos to True Blood to Game of Thrones and even Succession and Westworld for that first season, it always seemed like every year they had something to keep your subscription, but in the last few years that's changed. Since season 8, it's felt like HBO has struggled to keep people's attention, especially since the shift people have made from TV to streaming services. They never felt like they had enough of a lineup to keep everyone subscribed year long. Combine that with new experimental outings that didn't quite go anywhere, long-running shows coming to a close, and disastrous financial decisions, you have a company on its last legs and a shell of its former self. In January of 2023, the scripts for Season 2 were finished, but not long after, in March of the same year, we first learned of them reducing the episode count. In the same article, an HBO spokesperson said that the decision to do so was quote-unquote story-driven, but head writer Sarah Hess would later clarify that the decision to cut the episodes wasn't on the showrunners, confirming what everyone already suspected, that HBO needed to cut costs, and that's where they decided to do it. And this makes sense considering it felt as though we dragged our feet to an ending that didn't quite feel complete, and as it turns out, the big battle planned for this season to close it out had to be moved to Season 3 because of this whole thing. However, showrunner Ryan Condal stated that even if the season hadn't been reduced, they still wouldn't have had the budget to do that big battle sequence the way they would have wanted to if the original episodes stayed in, which, depending on how you look at it, isn't the saving grace he thinks it is. Because it sounds like despite the budget not being there for the big battle in the original episode 10 count, they were going to do it anyway, and it wouldn't have been to its full potential. So I guess it's a good thing that it was moved. Take that how you will. Before someone brings it up, yes, it is entirely possible that the writer's strike affected this whole thing, despite Ryan Condal saying otherwise, but the scripts were long done by the time filming started in April of 2023, and if anything, they weren't able to edit the scripts during filming, which is common, so again, take that as you may. I also want to throw this in here because I feel it's important, but long after any of this went down, they lost Miguel Sapochnik, the man who directed the Hard Home and Battle of Bastards episodes. Personally, I would have felt better if they had him back for these big moments, but at the same time, we also got a very good battle sequence in episode 4 with Alan Taylor, who directed a good chunk of early Game of Thrones episodes, so I'm confident that they can move forward without him, but still, I would like him back. All that said, Season 2, with so much against it, wasn't bad at all. Yes, there were pacing issues, especially during the second half of the season, which is where I'd argue a bulk of the issues come from, and then random-ass decisions that just didn't turn out the way we would have liked. For example, the incessant need to bring Rhaenyra and Alicent in the same room, fumbling blood and cheese, the White Walker stuff, among others. I would argue that Season 2, despite those other issues, was very entertaining. Especially the first half, episodes 1, 2, and 4 being complete standouts. Though of course, I understand that no matter how good some of it is, if it doesn't stick the landing, then it feels like it was all for nothing. The series has always been about character interactions building up to a big payoff, and that formula was definitely lacking in this season. However, I have to admit, I hate the lack of nuance here from some of the people in this fandom. Just because a couple of things didn't pan out the way we wanted doesn't mean all of this was garbage and all that time was wasted, and this is something we kept seeing time and time again, and I felt like these voices were louder than the actual majority of viewers who enjoyed the hell out of the season. You had people very early on calling the show boring, In the second episode, the episode that even George R.R. Martin himself, the creator of this whole thing, commented on being one of the best in the series. So what's been going on with all this? Well, it's a number of things, but before I go into it, I want to highlight one thing for you. If you had a problem with this season and you have actual substance behind your criticism, then this isn't aimed at you. All I ask is that your issues, whatever it may be, have some meat behind it, beyond "I'm bored." That said, let's talk about that specifically. It would be easy for me to brush this complaint aside by saying a majority of the people saying this are 20-somethings who never watched Game of Thrones when it was originally coming out, and yeah, there's something to that. A majority of those people weren't old enough to watch HBO back in 2011. Some of you weren't even out of preschool yet, and it does seem that the generation who had never known a world without the internet would be bored and impatient with a show that only comes out once a week instead of binging it. However, this is something only very few YouTubers have the unfortunate privilege of knowing. For those of you who don't know, I've been doing YouTube for 10 plus years now, and I started with Game of Thrones Season 4. If you ask anybody when Thrones started getting bad, they'll tell you it was right after Season 4, and that was the last good season. Well, again, being one of the very few YouTubers at the time covering the show, I went back through my comment section for Season 4, and any of this look familiar to you? So, like I said, it's easy for me to brush off these young kids as dumb, impatient, and lacking in nuance, which is totally true, by the way, but we weren't any different back in the day either. However, I'll say to you now what I said back then to those people. If you're bored by two people sitting in a room talking, then you were never a fan of this franchise in the first place, considering that's all it's ever been. The battles, the ice zombies, the dragons have never been a big part of it. It's the cherry on top of an already delicious sundae. So why does it feel like these complaints are always at the forefront of the conversation? Well, that's because the Twitter algorithm promotes tweets they think would get you to engage, and unfortunately, that often means dumb tweets like this or this get promoted more than people saying they liked it. There's no nuance with that, no substance, just some reactionary garbage that, unfortunately, gets more attention than it deserves. But what about the people who wanted Dave and Dan to return? Again, it's part of the idiocy that has grown in the community as time goes on and you have more people coming in. And dare I say, this type of shit is very Karen-esque behavior. Something goes down that you didn't like, and all of a sudden, you gotta shut it all down and fire everyone involved. It's what Karens do whenever they get upset over something, and it's what these people are doing by wanting Dave and Dan to come back and take over with their own team. But, like we saw with Game of Thrones, and I mentioned earlier, not even Dave and Dan can withstand HBO coming in and meddling in their show. And I find it funny that HBO is even still doing that, considering they're dead set on making it the Game of Thrones channel. Hopefully things will change for Season 3, which I'm excited for, and will be there front and center, and I hope you'll join me. But guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to leave a like and comment for the algorithm gods, it helps out a lot, and be sure to subscribe for more Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon videos. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.